All right, so we've been talking about the ongoing attempts by the GOP and the House of Representatives to leverage this upcoming debt ceiling fight in order to extract cuts to programs like Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. And we actually have a surprising actor who is throwing his hat in the ring now in order to actually defend Social Security and to tell Republicans to keep their filthy little gremlin hands off of this program. Now, we're going to watch this little 2-minute video here that Donald Trump put out directly, which is interesting for so many different reasons that you're going to see. But warning, directly after he makes the base statement on Social Security, he proceeds to do some typical, Trump shit here. So let's just go ahead and watch this clip.
Under no circumstances should Republicans vote to cut a single penny from Medicare or Social Security to help pay for Joe Biden's reckless spending spree, which is more reckless than anybody's ever done or had in the history of our country.
You gotta love how Trump makes every single circumstance the most extreme possible. Either we have the worst economy in the history of society, or we have the best economy in the history of the world, or we have the worst debt, or the best debt situation, or the worst border, or the best border situation. Everything has to be completely black and white on polar opposite ends of the spectrum, depending on whether or not he did it or, somebody else did it here. But again, I warned you guys, he had a good little take there on Social Security. Now he goes on to attack Joe Biden's radical social spending, packages or whatever the fuck he's put out, which has literally just been like crumbs to average working class people, most of which evaporated after just a couple short months. But he continues here.
Biden has blown out the federal budget, wasted trillions on left-wing lunacy and the ridiculous Green New Deal, which is a tremendous problem and embarrassment.
The Green New Deal. When did the Green New Deal get enacted? I didn't realize that based, vanguard leading comrade Joe Biden was, pushing through the Green New Deal. I must have missed that part of this. I mean, we had the Inflation Reduction Act with $37 billion a year over the next 10 years to address climate change, but that is not even remotely scratching the surface of what the Green New Deal is. But that's, apparently what Trump thinks has been going on since he left office. And I'll just say this as well, in terms of the debt and the deficit, first of all, I think it's completely overhyped. The debt ceiling is a, arbitrary metric, which a lot of people are actually arguing is unconstitutional according to the 14th Amendment, but that's a whole different argument to get into. Republicans, like Trump, do not give a single solitary shit about the debt and the deficit. They just use this to attack social programs. They use this to try to push austerity on working class people, while at the same time, what was Donald Trump's biggest accomplishment, so-called accomplishment, when he was in office? It was literally a tax cut that disproportionately benefited millionaires and billionaires and corporate America. You blew up the deficit in order to give a tax cut to the wealthy, okay, and in order to rapidly increase military spending as well. So when you blow up the debt and the deficit to do those things, to serve the most powerful and wealthy people in the country, that's completely fine. But when you do it to make mild, moderate investments in average working class Americans, then it's completely unacceptable at that point.
To us, and thrown open our treasury and our borders to migrants from all over the world. In fact, migrants that are coming from prisons and migrants that are coming from mental institutions are being dropped into the United States, and we do nothing about it.
Okay, not exactly sure what the fuck he's talking about there with people coming from mental institutions or something, but Joe Biden has been almost, close to being in perfect lockstep with Donald Trump on his border policy, okay? This is a guy who is actively backing a completely illegitimate government down in Haiti, specifically so that he can try to make it easier to deport Haitian asylum seekers back to this country as they are facing intense political violence and turmoil. Okay, that's Joe Biden for you. This is a guy, Joe Biden, who previously throughout his career was even open to building a giant border fence. Maybe it's not a border wall, but that's Joe Biden for you, okay? The idea that he's some open borders guy, what the fuck are you talking about? He's massively increased, ISIS budgets and Customs and Border Patrol budgets as well. I mean, this is not a guy who is some open borders policy guy. I mean, it's just completely insane that every single thing that Republicans attack Joe Biden on, with all of the different things you could legitimately, in a good faith and substantive way, target Joe Biden on, which I do on a regular basis on this channel. He has many different shortcomings you could go after, but they choose to go after him on completely strawmanned, made up things that just don't exist in reality.
I had the safest border in the history of our country just 2 years ago, and now we have probably the worst border in the history of the world. I don't think any country has ever had anything like we have right now. Well, we absolutely need to stop Biden's out-of-control spending. The pain should be borne by Washington bureaucrats, not by hardworking American families and American seniors. The seniors are being absolutely destroyed in the last 2 years. Cut the hundreds of billions of taxpayer dollars going to corrupt foreign countries. Cut the mass releases of illegal aliens that are depleting our social safety net and destroying our country.
Okay, I just got to say this right now, okay? People who he calls illegal aliens but undocumented immigrants in the United States, they pay into programs like Social Security and they don't get the vast majority of those benefits. Maybe you could say like, okay, if they use a hospital or something, they're using some partially taxpayer-backed thing. You could make a stretch of an argument, I guess, but the main core social programs, if you are an undocumented immigrant, you do not have the documentation to get access to those benefits. Okay, so if anything, illegal or undocumented immigrants are putting disproportionately more into funding those programs than they are taking out of them. So just needed to throw that in there real quick.
Cut the left-wing gender programs from our military. Cut the billions being spent on climate extremism. Cut waste, fraud, and abuse everywhere that we can find it, and there's plenty of it. But do not cut the benefits our seniors worked for and paid for their entire lives. Save Social Security. Don't destroy it. The Democrats are looking to destroy Social Security. We're not going to let them do it. Thank you.
What? Hold on. The Democrats are trying to destroy Social Security? This whole thing, you're doing a video right now. You are literally recording a video to try to tell Republicans to cut that shit out, okay, to stop trying to cut Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. Now, I don't know if he specifically referenced those other programs, but Social Security, right? You are making a call-out video basically against, like, Kevin McCarthy and the rest of those, in many cases, even, like, some of the most fervent MAGA supporters, like Lauren Boebert and Matt Gaetz, who are the ones who extracted some of the concessions that is leading to this debt ceiling showdown, right? That was one of their core main asks, is they wanted to be able to use this point of leverage in order to cut those programs, which is also fucking hilarious because, again, those people, Lauren Boebert, Matt Gaetz, Marjorie Taylor Greene or whatever, and Donald Trump himself, they constantly pretend like, oh, I'm the outside, anti-establishment, anti-elitist person, right? But then their main core ask from that whole Speaker McCarthy battle that went down was to cut Social Security, probably the single most popular and important program in the country, arguably one of the most successful programs in the history of the United States, and that's what one of their main asks was. Okay, so these are not populists, these are not outsiders, these are not anti-elitists. They are purely in service of corporate America and the military-industrial complex, which is another fucking hilarious thing that Trump throws in there because he talks about potentially slashing the military budget, right? We've heard this from a couple different conservatives as well, but all he references is the woke portions of the military, which, like, what are you talking about? Okay, so the problem with the U.S. military isn't that, you know, we're engaged in all of these overseas wars and covert operations and have 900 military bases. We spend nearly $1 trillion a year. Pentagon can't pass an audit. They failed 5 goddamn audits in a row. They have trillions of dollars unaccounted for. None of that is inherently a bad thing. It's just like, what, the woke people in the military, or like, what are you referencing? Like that some trans people joined the military, or I don't know, like some general held up a pride flag or something? Like, what are you even referencing? I mean, again, this is how you know it's so surface level for these people, right? I mean, again, all of the different critiques you could have of the military, and they're like, yeah, we're willing to cut it, but just the woke parts, whatever that means. Who knows what that means? So, I mean, listen, again, you got to really work your way through the weeds with a lot of things that Trump comes out and says. I mean, he's attacking the, you know, non-existent Green New Deal that hasn't been passed in virtually any way, shape, or form, right? Attacking that as if it has been passed. Attacking Joe Biden because he thinks he's an open border policy type of president, even though he's agreed with like 90% of Trump's immigration policies, right? Going on all of these different tangents and just making things up on the fly, it seems like. But then the one thing that he says there is that's actually like substantive and a good thing, I actually will give him credit for it, right? Protecting Social Security. So is this an example of Donald Trump actually sort of reverting back to some of the rhetoric that and strategy that he was using back in 2016, where he did have, at least in rhetoric, again, not on policy substance, but on rhetoric, had a little bit more of that policy or that populist appeal, where he knows how popular this program is and he knows how bad it would be to be on the flip side of this and trying to be the ones that are fighting to cut these programs under the complete bullshit guise that somehow they're going to run out of money in the future or something like that, right? Which I'll circle back around to here with a policy from Bernard Sanders. But I mean, again, mild credit here to Donald Trump for being on the right side of this issue. Now, it seems like we're going to be headed for an interesting showdown, because him coming out and making this statement so, aggressively and so out in the open like this, it is going to put a lot of Republicans in a tough position, because, you basically need to have a completely, unified Republican caucus on this issue when it comes to the debt ceiling fight and exactly what concessions you're trying to get out of it, right? You need to stay unified. And now you have the leader of your party, presumably, unless it's Ron DeSantis, right, with the top dog within your party still to this day, who is coming out and saying, don't do that shit. So how are they going to respond? How is Kevin McCarthy going to respond? How is Marjorie Taylor Greene or Lauren Boebert or Matt Gaetz? How are they going to respond to this? Are they going to double down on this? Are they going to listen to Trump? It'll be pretty interesting, to say the least, to see how this divide within the Republican Party ends up going. Now, with Ron DeSantis, that'll also be an interesting question, depending on what he says about this, because he's sort of in a position now where a lot of establishment people who would support cutting Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, where they would be in favor of that type of a policy or of that type of a push by the GOP, and DeSantis is sort of courting the more, establishment figures that fund the GOP, the establishment, members who just really dislike Trump because they, want basically a cleaned up version of Trump, which is what Ron DeSantis basically is, even though they agree on 99.9% of their policies. But this will be interesting to see where Ron DeSantis decides to go on this. And so just some recent polling data that we've gotten on where we currently stand on this. I mean, it's all over the fucking place at this point. We're still in just the early parts of 2023. We're waiting for 2024 for the primary, so it's probably too early to get an actual, real, legit picture from this. But I mean, again, I've seen this all over the place. I see some here from Suffolk saying that Ron DeSantis significantly outpolling Donald Trump. Another one here from the Wall Street Journal: Ron DeSantis holds early lead over Donald Trump among GOP primary voters. But then I've seen other ones that are like, Trump trounces Ron DeSantis in a potential GOP primary matchup, new poll finds. So I mean, again, it's sort of all over the place right now, and there's a lot still left up in the air. But if Donald Trump actually recognizes why he had some degree of populist appeal back in 2016, why he was able to beat Hillary Clinton and then lost his edge and lost to Joe Biden because he couldn't shut the fuck up about the election, right? But I mean, if he actually has a little bit of that populist rhetoric making a resurgence and puts, Ron DeSantis in a difficult position here where he may have to take some of these less populist or less popular policy stances because he's trying to court the establishment, that'll be pretty interesting to see as well. But I mean, listen, at the end of the day, specifically on this issue of Social Security, I've made my opinion on this pretty clear at this point. But here, as pointed out by one of Bernie's top dogs, Warren Gunnels, his staff director for Senator Sanders, he points this out. He says, if Bernie's Social Security bill to expand and fund Social Security was signed into law last year, Elon Musk, just as one example, would have paid $2.9 billion more in taxes. No one making $250,000 or less would have paid a penny more in taxes, so the vast majority of the American people, and benefits would have gone up by $2,400 a year, and Social Security would be solvent for 75 years. And it looks like he's even put a significant degree of successful pressure here on Joe Manchin, because as pointed out here by Igor, he says Manchin on CNN says that there should be no cuts to those now getting Social Security and Medicare. Now, that's a little bit of tricky language there, because he says no cuts to those now getting Social Security and Medicare. Does he mean just the current benefits that people are getting right now in this moment, and maybe we'll work out some sort of deal for the future generations to fuck them over on these programs? He could be indicating that, but he says he rejects the idea of raising the Social Security retirement age, so that's good, and he instead suggests raising the taxable wage cap for employees paying into the program. Rare, the most rare W of all time here from Manchin. Okay, that's a pretty semi-decent take for who we're talking about here. And again, as Bernie Sanders was pointing out here, I mean, again, the only problem with Social Security funding, which is what Republicans are centering their argument around, right? They're trying to say, well, we're not cutting Social Security, don't worry about that. We're protecting it in the long run, because if we don't make cuts to it, then it's going to run out of money. No, it's complete fucking nonsense. They're making this up. It's an artificial cap that they have put in place at roughly, I think it's around like $150,000 or $160,000 limit right now, where basically if you're making the upper end on that limit, right? If you're making $160,000 a year, let's say, okay, you are paying the same amount of your income on an annual basis into Social Security as somebody like Elon Musk, who is bringing in millions, if not billions of dollars a year. Okay, so that's the problem, is we have this artificial cap on how much somebody is going to have to pay into Social Security in their wages, right? So you lift that cap and you can fund it, as you pointed out there, for the next 75 years and expand it so that seniors are getting better benefits, more annual income from the Social Security program, and you wouldn't have to raise taxes on anybody, not by a single penny, making less than $250,000 a year. So what are we talking about here? Okay, the solution to addressing the solvency problem with Social Security, it's staring you right in the face. Make the rich pay more into the program. Boom, that's it. You're done. Easy to solve, right? So, I mean, again, we're going to be headed for this debt ceiling showdown. We're going to be headed for potential negotiations between the Biden administration, between Democrats and these House GOP Republicans, right? And it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out, because there is absolutely no reason whatsoever, from any angle you want to look at this, to give in a single inch to these Republicans in the House of Representatives. Not only do you have Donald Trump now coming out and telling them not to do it. So that's another added piece of leverage for Democrats to be using on that front to try to exploit some sort of a rift within the Republican Party. So you have that in your back pocket, but you know what else you have in your back pocket is the support of the vast, vast majority of the American people. This is, again, one of the single most popular programs in the country. Okay, this has been around for decades. It is something that seniors rely on in order to not just collapse into poverty once they stop working, right? And stop, being good little cogs in the machine for the capitalist class. So it's a vitally important program, and it'll be interesting to see if somebody like Joe Biden, who has spent a large portion of his career in the Senate and even under the Obama administration, working to help to try to have some sort of bipartisan cuts to a lot of these programs. So we're going to get to see a lot of, interesting stuff playing out in the Republican Party between potentially Ron DeSantis and Donald Trump, as well as Kevin McCarthy and the whole rest of those, clowns in the House Republican caucus. And we're also going to get to see some pretty revealing stuff coming out about how Joe Biden wants to be operating in this top position within the Democratic Party.
Everyone is saying good politic guy has the best politic. Believe me, no one does it like him. Believe me. Everyone is saying